so let's go ahead and officially get started. Welcome everybody to Mylio Photos Coffee Break. Glad you're able to join us. I think this is the biggest crowd we've had so far. I think this is, I believe, our 4th episode, so glad you all are here. Today, my special guest is Osiris Indriya. He is our marketing lead, and he's going to talk about how to set up your system for faster sync and backup. He's been with Mylio a long time. Thus, he's had a lot of time to try different setups, experiment, and kind of learn by the school of hard knocks what works and what doesn't, and what gives you the most bang for your buck as far as a setup. So I'm going to turn the floor over to him so he can walk through what he's learned and share that with you. So welcome, Osiris. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. So as Angela was saying, I've been at Mylio. I started January 2016. That's when I first joined the team, and I joined in the same role that I have now. A lot has changed in that time, and I have watched the app develop quite a bit and learned a lot of things the hard way. And I want to give some caveats here that prior to Mylio, I was an Aperture user. I've never been big into manually editing photos. I use Photoshop, but I use it more to create flyers, to create marketing collateral. In my career for decades, I've done Photoshop. I've never really gotten into Lightroom. I don't like to spend a lot of time with my images. So my workflow and my setup isn't necessarily ideal for people who, for example, need originals everywhere because you really, really want to do deep edits on many devices. The setup that I'm going to be describing is really optimized for the fastest and most efficient backup wherever you are, on whatever device you're on. So, and I'll just start sharing my screen to get the slides up. So again, these are my strategies in my setup. So we can talk about, once I've gone through this, some other options if this doesn't match your specific needs. So my goals were to establish a 3-2-1 backup system with Mylio Photos. 3-2-1 is a really good backup system. I'm going to go into that in more detail in just a moment. I want to maximize the efficiency of syncing, meaning speed. I want it to happen quickly. I don't want to turn off my device and realize a bunch of originals didn't make it somewhere I wanted them to be. I want them to get there as quickly as possible. And I want to have enough of them where I'm protected from theft, loss, hardware failure, whatever might, data corruption. I don't want to ever lose anything. And the factors that I'm taking into account in my setup are the device types that I have, how many of them I have, where they're located, and the connection speeds. And then I'm going to share some of my experiential learning, and then I'm going to give you my configuration as an example. Going into my goals, 3-2-1 backup is essentially saying 3 copies of your data, all of your original files need to be in at least 3 locations, that you would have 2 media types at a minimum. So media types could be an SSD versus a hard disk. It could be cloud storage as another option. If we're going old school, burn to a DVD, tape. I don't know how old school you want to get, but you want to have some other media type. You don't want to have everything on a USB external drive and that's all you've got. So 3 copies of that is less robust than having some other kind of media type. And then you want to have at least 1 remote location, because if some catastrophic disaster happened in one location and all of your stuff was gone, you want to have at least a copy in somewhere else, because it's very unlikely that same issue happens in 2 locations that are remote from each other. So this doesn't solve 100% of all loss cases, of course, but it handles the vast majority. So it deals with theft, hardware failure, natural disaster, and data corruption really well. And we actually have a long video about 3-2-1 backup. And if you go to mylio.com/3-2-1-video, you can watch that whole video. Our head of product, Rich Harrington, does a great job, and Angela and JC and others are on that video as well. Great video. So efficiency, I want to achieve this 3-2-1 backup automatically. I don't want to have to think about it. I don't want to have to be doing work to make it happen. I just want to be able to open Mylio, use Mylio, and know that it's happening. I want to minimize syncing time. So again, I don't want to shut it out off in the middle and have things not get where they're supposed to go. But I also want to have access on all of my devices to everything I need to do the things I want to do. I don't want to feel like I have to spend a lot of time downloading files that are missing on any device. I want to be able to do all the things I want to do right there, right away. So I want to have just enough devices doing all the right things with the right files to be protected quickly. How are we sounding? Does that sound good?
It makes lots of sense. And for anybody who's looking for that video that he mentioned, I did put it into the chat so you can easily copy and paste that and watch it later if you like.
So what I learned is that more copies isn't necessarily better, because then you're just taking up extra space. You want just the right amount of everything. That's the goal. So here are the main factors that I learned to pay attention to. Number one is device type, and there's two main device types in Mylio Photos. Number one, you have viewing devices, and viewing devices have screens. That's the simplest definition. So it's your computers, tablets, phones, where you actually interact with the app, where the app is installed, running, and you're interacting with it, are viewing devices. There's the next type is vault devices, which can be external hard drives. It could be network attached storage or a NAS. It can be the cloud. It could be a viewing device. I'm going to propose that it shouldn't be a viewing device. It can be. If you have a viewing device with a lot of space and you need your originals right there on that device, you can totally do that. I've chosen not to, and I'll explain why. So vault devices are storage locations that hold your entire Mylio Photos catalog, which is data that you don't necessarily view. So it's the catalog information that makes Mylio work. It holds all of your original files. It also holds some optimized versions of your files called previews and thumbnails. It also holds all of your metadata, which is either baked into the files themselves or can be found in the XMP sidecar files. There's more information on all of these terms I'm throwing out on our manual. Angela has done a fantastic job making our new manual. It still feels new to me. It's been around for a few months now, but it's been a long time coming that we have such a great, robust manual. But we have all of these things defined well there. And what's really important to note about a vault is that a vault attempts to store all of your original files by default. And if that vault device that you've set up doesn't have enough space for your entire library, Mylio is smart enough to try to get your originals onto another vault that does have space to make sure things are redundantly backed up. So if you are a kind of person who has many terabytes of photos and you find it challenging to find a device or a drive big enough, Mylio can handle that scenario. In my case, my library is not so big, so it's very easy for me to find a single device that can hold everything. I just wanted to mention that Mylio can handle much larger libraries just fine. So then that's device types. Is there any questions about that before I skip to our connection types?
We have one question in the chat from Steve. He says, is cloud storage organized the same as our local vault or simply a dump of all photos?
I am less technical, but my experience is that it does not include it doesn't view the same way that a vault drive does, but it does contain the information you need. So if it's a vault and it's a cloud, you could technically rebuild your library from it, but it's not, you can't navigate it in the same way you can navigate a vault hard drive, for example.
That is correct.
Exactly.
I can help with this, and that is correct. So our vault implementation is more of a black box. So all the data is saved to the cloud, but it is contained in a folder structure that is only readable through the database. It's not human readable. But you could use a cloud vault to recreate that structure on a local device and then have all your folder organization availability.
Awesome. I love it when I'm right.
We have one other question from Harold. He says, should or can the Mylio library be on an external vault drive? And the answer is yes. I'm going to put an article into the chat that you can take a look at of how to move your Mylio library folder and have that on an external drive if that's what you choose.
I did that for many years. And I recently stopped doing that. And I'm going to explain why in a little bit. So yes, you can do it and it works, but it slows things down a bit sometimes under certain conditions.
Yep.
So we'll talk about that. So connection types. So you have wireless connections, which are very common these days. And so you have Wi-Fi on your local area network or LAN. So your local wireless connection. So devices talking to this on the same network at home or in the office, which is definitely faster, and it's only limited by the devices themselves and your router speeds and the Wi-Fi frequencies you have available. So I have a little image here showing the difference between 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi signals. 2.4 going further but being slower, 5 gigahertz being faster but need to be closer together. I experimented with a ton of routers. I have a really nice router setup. If we have time later, I'll talk about that separately. But speed and efficiency is important to me, so I'm willing to invest in getting good stuff to make these wireless connections as quick as possible. So then there's Wi-Fi across the internet. So now your internet service provider throttles your speed to some degree. How much are you paying for? How much bandwidth are you paying for? Do you have 10 megabytes per second? Do you have 100? Do you have gig? Do you have, as someone at our team has, 5 gig speeds? There's a lot of different variable speeds available, but as soon as you go out of your local network onto the internet, you also have a lot of hops. So each hop from place to place can have a limiting effect on speed. So the more it gets more complicated, right? You're going outside of your area of control. So often it can slow things down. Not always, but it definitely can. So then you have your wired connections. I'm not going into all these in detail. I just wanted to show the nerds who want this kind of detail, because you have your host device, you have the cable that you're using, and then you have the destination device, all adding up to a speed essentially. So the main wired connections available today are USB, and there's many different types, as you can see here. There's Ethernet, also many different types. There's Thunderbolt, which also has many different types. So a lot of people think, oh, there's Thunderbolt 1, 2, 3, 4. No, it's a little more complicated than that. So the hardware you're using, the connection cable, and the connection type you're using, both ends of the hardware all play into this speed. So if you're really a speed freak, then you would want to make sure that you're tracking that speed capacity all the way through end to end. But generally speaking, if you have newer equipment and you're careful about the cables you're choosing, wherever you're buying them, I often buy on Amazon. I spend a lot of time looking for that connection speed. And these USB 3, USB 2, USB 3.1, like you want to put in the specific search terms to get the speed and capacities that you want when you're buying cables. Cables are very important. Any questions about connections?
Nothing in the chat. Does anybody have questions they want to unmute and ask? All right.
All right.
Well, we will have Q&A time at the end too. So if you have questions, you can save them up as well.
So what I learned first was that you can have too many vaults. So I was really wanting to be protected. So I actually had 5 or 6 vaults at my peak. And when you think about it, every time you bring in a new set of original photos, I go on a photo shoot with what I used to have as my Nikon. Now I have a Canon, I have a Sony RX100. I go out, I use my phone, wherever it is, I create a volume of pictures. Now Mylio has to schedule and send originals to every single vault that I have connected and active. And if they're all on and active, if I'm sending to 6 vaults and one of them is a cloud, that could take forever. It's a very long chain of things to happen because one device has those originals and needs to communicate with all these other devices. And the original files are huge compared to previews and thumbnails, which I'll talk more about in a moment. So really, if I want to get the benefit of 3-2-1 backup, I only need a minimum vault count of 3. I need 2 on my main location and 1 somewhere else. There's no real good reason for me to have more than 3. And when I cut down my vault count to 3, it made a dramatic impact on my sync speed. Then it's deciding which devices should be vaults. If I have all these other devices, what are the ones that matter? SSDs, so solid state drives, and hard disk drives are both useful. An SSD is a rugged, portable, fast drive that's perfect for taking with you and having minimal risk for being damaged or breaking. So if you want to have a vault that goes with you on the go, again, assuming that your library is not super huge. So mine is under 1 terabyte. So it's fairly easy for me to buy a solid state drive that fits everything. So I can definitely have a solid state vault. If we have more than 1 terabyte, then a hard disk drive is going to be much better because hard disk drives have higher capacities available and at much lower cost, but they do have a limited lifespan compared to solid state drives. So when you're choosing your vault devices, so each of these is a media type. They're definitely a different type of storage. So I have one of each as example, because I have a library that still fits. And if you're someone who has a larger library, a NAS could be an alternate option for a different type of media, because now you're having many drives with data spread across them. So it's a slightly different setup. You can also create a NAS in more modern NASs with SSDs. So that's a way of taking SSDs that aren't too expensive and making them bigger. You could buy a bunch of 1 terabyte SSDs in a multi-drive NAS as an array, and it will add up to a larger space. Talk about smart previews here. Okay. So wired over wireless whenever possible. That's my next big learning. So newer Ethernet and newer USB connections are roughly equivalent today. So it used to be that one was clearly faster than the other under certain circumstances, but in almost all cases now, they're all around, at least they claim to be around gigabit speed. So if you're on your local network and you're using a USB 3 device, or you're using a newer Ethernet cable with a newer router, then you're going to get roughly equivalent speeds. So it kind of doesn't matter if you choose Ethernet or USB to wire connect your devices, but wireless can vary because of interference. If you have a lot of devices, if you have smart home devices, if you have people streaming video on your network, Wi-Fi can be a little more inconsistent, but generally is very fast locally. As soon as you get out to the internet, though, that's where things really slow down. So I try to keep all of my local vaults on wired connections. I can get that fastest speed, ideally connected to my primary viewing device. So 1 USB 3.0 external SSD plus 1 USB 3.0 external hard disk drive. That's what I have as my 2 vaults at home. And generally speaking, the cloud is slow. It is super, super slow. It's not only slow because it's on the internet. It's slow because cloud services often throttle their speeds on purpose. They're trying to prevent you from using it as a high traffic location. They want it to be slow, so you use it infrequently because they have a cost associated with bandwidth usage. So they might be selling you some number of terabytes or gigabytes, but really it's the movement of data that gets really expensive for these companies. So they do throttle you and slow you down. I use Amazon Drive and I know that my days are numbered there. I'm sure we'll have more conversations as a company as to alternatives for those of us moving away from Amazon. But right now, I'm actually grandfathered into Amazon Drive Unlimited for just a short period of time longer. So I've been using that as a vault for many years now, but I only have one there. What's great about cloud is it's always on, it's always accessible from the internet. If my computer at home, even though I leave it on when I travel, like we were talking about just before we started, so I can access the vaults remotely over the internet while I'm out and about. If something happens and the power goes out at home and my computer is somehow off, Amazon is there. So that's why I do like having it, but it dramatically slows things down. So the benefit for me is guaranteed on wherever I am, but the drawback is definitely a major hit in speed. But I'm willing to make that choice.
If we could step back just for a second, Fran had a question about the, she asked, is it wired between router and modem in the computer, or are you talking about wired between different devices when you talk about wired connections? Both?
I wire everything I can. If it's close enough and I have a long enough wire it.
Okay.
For these Mylio devices. And I'll get more specific examples in just a moment.
Excellent.
So this is a big one here I was just mentioning earlier, internal Mylio library folder. So the default location when you start Mylio, it asks you to put your Mylio library on your device somewhere like your documents folder or somewhere on your main hard drive, depending on which platform you're on. And honestly, the default location is ideal. Now, I thought I was smarter than Mylio, and even though I work here and I have access to the engineers, and I could have asked a long time ago, but I was like, no, I want my library folder, my Mylio folder. So I'm running Mylio on my desktop computer, and I want to save my Mylio as a vault on an external drive. So that way, all the originals are in the main Mylio library when I open it. And I did find some major slowdowns to that. It's complicated because of just the interaction between your operating system and its own internal drive compared to any kind of a USB device. And when you're doing a lot of big moves, that can really add up quickly. So what I found was better was have Mylio set to auto-optimized on any viewing device, have the Mylio folder and the default location that Mylio suggests, and then have access to that vault, which is connected via USB as a separate device with your originals. So your originals always, even though you import them on to your main computer often, depending on how you have that set up, I'm not going to go into details about that, but often the originals move off and on to the vault. So that keeps my main viewing device's hard drive relatively empty, because when you start to fill up any viewing device's hard drive, you get major slowdowns in performance. And that can happen pretty quickly when you're dealing with photos and video. So moving all of those off and only keeping the smart previews, which is what Auto-Optimize tries to do on any viewing device, lets me do all the things that I want to do. So I like to edit my photos using Mylio's tools. I like to share my photos, and I like to view my photos. I like to export them in batches. I do just normal basic things. Occasionally I'll edit in Photoshop, but all of that I can do with Smart Previews and Mylio's ability to intelligently download originals as needed. So if I'm trying to get to an original from my viewing device, because my vault is connected, it'll just pull it in as needed instead of leaving it stored on that device. So Mylio's smart enough to behave like originals are on the viewing device, even though they're not. So I take advantage of that for performance reasons.
So Tom had a question. How do I know where Mylio set up my Mylio folder? By default, it's going to be in your root of roots folder in your user folder. And I put a link into the chat that walks you through what files that Mylio creates on your computer and on your different devices, and that'll help you locate it.
Great. So now we're in my example. Here's my actual setup. So I have 5 viewing devices. I love Apple, but I do have one Windows device. So I have a Mac Studio, MacBook Pro, a Surface Pro, an iPhone, and an iPad. I use all of them with Mylio depending on where I am and what I'm doing. And I have my 3 vault devices, the Crucial SSD, which is 2 terabytes, a Seagate hard disk drive, which is 4 terabytes, and my Amazon drive. My total library is less than 1 terabyte. It's getting kind of close now. So these are probably the minimum. I like to think of you want double the space of what your library currently is at least. So this is my point of view. This is not the official Mylio point of view, but I want to be able to So for example, if I bring in a big batch all at once, I want the room and capacity to handle that. And I know about what size of batches I bring in. So having just more than double is good, but this crucial SSD is definitely might be needing an upgrade soon. So again, all of these devices, because they're viewing devices, I set them to have the default library folder. You don't have much control on mobile devices, but on the Windows and Mac OS devices, I just, wherever Mylio suggests is what I do, and I leave it as auto-optimized, which is the default. Again, I just decided Mylio is smarter and let it make that call for me, even though I was very much into changing that up in the past. Now, these drives here are both what we call provisioned drives. And what that means is they're a dedicated Mylio device. I don't use them for anything else other than a Mylio vault. Provision drives can be disconnected. They're right now connected to my Mac Studio, which is what I'm broadcasting on right now. I can take them off of my Mac Studio and plug them into any of these other two devices because I've never attempted to plug them directly to my iPad and iPhone. Maybe that's possible. But I can plug them into any device and they just work as expected. So it's just a Mylio vault and it's kind of independent. It can go wherever. I can take one with me. So my crucial SSD, even though it's always at home, that's one I can take on the road. It's rugged. It's ready to go. If I'm going to spend a month somewhere, which I do sometimes, I can take that with me. And I have a vault device with my more portable computer now. Ready to go. So now my configuration can follow me somewhat. And then I leave the hard disk drive at home connected to my Mac Studio, which I leave on and connected to the internet. So it kind of acts like a personal cloud remotely.
I want to just add a little something that a couple of months ago, I had a computer crash and I had a provision drive with all of my images. When I got my new laptop, all I had to do was plug in that drive to the new laptop, install Mylio, and my library was accessible just like it was on my old computer. So incredibly fast. It was amazing. So something to keep in mind.
Definitely. Yeah, these provisioned vault drives are brilliant. I love it.
Just a quick technical note, because Debbie Downer. Make sure that your hard drive is formatted in a file system that can be recognized by both Mac and Windows if you intend to go back and forth between the two operating systems. This is beyond Mylio. This is more at the operating system level.
Yes.
If you format your drive to be a Mac-only format or to be an NTFS file format, for example, which is the default Windows format, those drives will be readable by the operating system, the opposing operating system. So an NTFS file system can be read by a Mac, but you cannot write to it. So Mylio will not recognize it as a valid file system. So if you create a vault that you intend to use between Windows and Mac, just make sure that it's formatted in the exFAT format, exFAT.
No, that's great. Thank you. And any cloud solution you don't have to worry about, because that's handled based on their API and interactivity. So there's no issue with format or anything, but definitely true with both. So again, getting a little bit nerdy here. So I've classified all of my devices as to their type. So here's all my viewing devices, all my vaults, what the capacity is. So you can see some of them are smaller capacity. The iPad and iPhone could not hold my entire library. It's bigger than that. But being auto-optimized, I have tons of extra space. It's not an issue. I have my connection types, location, and then my snail and winter cloud speed down here. And then a bonus, I actually own a Synology NAS, and I love it. I really love it. But I do not use it with Mylio at all, actually, because the way Mylio deals with vaults is my preferred method for backing up photos and video. That there's no reason for me to add an additional vault because I've already got 321 in my current configuration. So all that's going to do is slow down my backup. And often a multi-drive NAS like mine is which I have set up RAID 5, it would be like having a redundant backup of a redundant backup. There's a little bit of a speed slowdown when you're dealing with RAID. It's not really perceptible. It's not a big deal. So it's a total viable way of doing it. But the other thing about a NAS is it's not provisioned, for example, like a hard drive can be. It must remain connected to its source device, the viewing device it's connected to, even though it's on a network. And technically, it should be able to connect to all devices. Mylio can only work with it connected through one dedicated device. What I've decided is I use my Synology NAS as a way of redundantly backing up for part of my 3-to-1 backup for things I do not want in my Mylio library. So there are things I don't want to view that way. There's some old work things, or I'm holding files for other people that I just, because I'm an archivist kind of person, that I'm storing and protecting things that I don't want to see in my Mylio library. I use the Synology for that. I use it as a media server. It does lots of other great things for me, but I choose not to use it in my Mylio configuration today. I'm sure that that'll change at some point in the future, but
I have a question on that. I actually am using a NAS as one of my fixed devices for a vault. And the reason I'm using it is because I actually have 2 vaults hanging off of my computer. One is an SSD, so I can go portable, and the other is my NAS. The upside to a NAS is, let's say it's a 4-bay NAS. It actually doesn't matter how many. It could be an 8-bay NAS. The advantage is if you put your vault on a NAS, you actually have 4 or 8 vaults, because a drive can fail in a NAS. You can take that drive out and put a new drive in while it's formatted. You can still have access to your vault. So they're a very expensive luxury, but they're a very safe luxury. So I think it's an upside for a little bit of performance difference. They are slower. They're much slower than an SSD, unless they are SSDs. But that's the counter opinion I'd offer on that.
Yep. No, it's definitely a valid way to go. Tons of people use NAS with Mylio. And we're definitely have on our roadmap to even make NAS work even better than it does today. But I just chose not to because of my hyper focus on efficiency. That, you know, regular hard disk drive is cheap enough to replace, and they get cheaper all the time, cheaper and bigger. So, and my library is going to grow. So the size of whatever I have today is inevitably going to become too small. So
that was actually a point I left out. My library grows really quickly because I have a very large megapixel camera. So, you know, when I'm bringing in 60 megabit pictures that are 117 megs each, it fills up disk space in a hurry. So that I forgot that point. There's a secondary reason why I'm using a NAS.
Yep. Totally.
Well, one other thing to consider is a NAS is great. I'm using a RAID device. I'm using a Drobo. It's not a NAS. It's not network connected. So it functions like an external hard drive. It doesn't have some of the other caveats that a NAS does, as far as it having to have that mother computer that it talks to with Mylio. So that was the one I was able to plug in from the old computer, plug it in the new computer. Once I had all the software installed, everything worked brilliantly. So if you need, you know, bigger storage, that's another option as well. I know Drobo is not necessarily in the best place right now. They just filed for Chapter 11, which is a little concerning, but there are a lot of other similar devices out there. Harold had a question. He says, for Osiris, when you say my library, are you saying that all your photos or just your Mylio library? If the Mylio library is in the root of the hard drive, what is on the vault? In other words, all the photos are on the vault and there is some other library. I don't know if you want to read that in the chat and maybe understand the better.
And if I don't get this, Harold, please clarify. But Mylio, by design, tries to intelligently locate things in a way where they're protected if there's enough of devices with enough space. So if, by default, when I install Mylio on a computer, the default setting is to have your library folder, which you decide during onboarding, the first little slides you see when you start the app the first time, You select a location. So I use the default location. And then it is going to store, if it's the only device, it stores everything there because it's all the devices it sees. So even though it's auto optimized, the optimization is you have one device, all things must go here. A little bit oversimplification, but when you add a dedicated vault device, though, that changes what Mylio can do now. So if I add a USB vault wire connected to that original device, now I've provisioned it and dedicated it as a Mylio device. That's the best kind of protection device. It now wants all originals, and it allows my computer to offload originals onto that vault so they don't need to stay there. What stays there is typically what we call smart previews, which if you shoot in RAW, as an example, it's about 5% the file size. So in terms of storage needed, you only need 5% of the storage, but the image is such a good quality that you can blow it up full screen and it looks amazing. You can print a 5x7 print of it and it looks perfect. You can do all your Mylio non-destructive edits on that smart preview, do any organization. It behaves as if it's an original. It's like a proxy for an original, but it takes up a lot less space. So if my computer is running out of space, it can offload the originals onto the Vault device and all those smart previews stay. Now, if I have such a large library that not even the smart previews can fit on that one device, it will offload any of the photos I rarely interact with, and will keep what's called a thumbnail, which is just a tiny image. It will look pixelated if I try to blow it up. But again, Mylio is very smart. If a vault is connected and I click on a thumbnail, it can bring in the smart preview or the original, depending on what I'm trying to do with it. So on demand, I can get access to the higher quality, even though it's not stored locally all the time. So it becomes dynamic. So the viewing device being auto-optimized, it really facilitates that viewing, editing, using experience, while the vault is really where everything is all the time and stays there. So if you had a single device that is your Mylio library, it's a vault device versus a viewing device. I hope that answered your question.
All right, and then we had a couple of comments from, it was both from Steve and from Jacques, that with the Paragon driver, you can read and write both Windows and Mac file formats with an NTFS drive.
Oh, cool.
Something cool to keep in mind. And it looks like, yes, Harold's question was answered. So great. Are there any other questions? You guys can feel free to unmute your mics and ask, or pop them into the chat, whatever's convenient for you. All right. Looks like John said, will it soon be possible to plug in a provision device on an iPad? Understand Apple is opening the interface up. Do we have any information on that? I don't know if JC, you have any info or.
It's something that I really want. And I know it's something that our CEO really wants. So it's high on our list, but and on the roadmap, but I don't have a timeline as to when it'll happen. And yes, a lot of it depends on Apple letting us do certain things.
We do have a relationship with Seagate and with Micron Crucial, and we have been talking to them about this. And one of the main limiting factors, like with SSDs that don't have a power supply, like most don't, they're device powered, is the lightning, whatever the connection is to iPhones and iPads of the past, the older connection type, does not bring enough power in to power an SSD drive. So that is a limiting factor. USB-C on the newer iPads might work in some cases, and Android devices sometimes can connect to a drive. So I wouldn't say that it doesn't work today, but it's not something that is officially handled and supported either by the hard drive manufacturers or by us as a limitation of getting power to the device.
Yeah, and to be clear, there's two different types of interactivity that you want from an SSD drive connected to an iPad. One is as a source, which is much easier to do because you can already plug in a memory card to your iPad and read those photos directly into Mylio. And that's in essence what an SSD drive is flash memory. So that's much easier to support. What I was referring to and I would like to see support and we're working towards is having a vault that's on an SSD drive and connecting that vault to your iPad, because that would make traveling with Mylio even better than it already is.
Absolutely. Mark's got his hand up. Mark, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it was sort of, you were going to mention it, but I don't think you did, is that what were the drawbacks from moving your Mylio library from your internal to an external device? I've been considering that because I have like a 10 terabyte library. And it's like, even for the thumbnails and stuff, my 1 terabyte internal is starting to get filled up. So I needed to move it. So it's basically what I'm at now is like, do I move it knowing the caveats or go out and buy
May I jump in here, guys?
Please.
So I want to identify some terminology, and I think that would help with some of the confusion. So there's really two folders that we refer to in the Mylio world. One is the Mylio library folder. And this is a folder that when you're first setting up Mylio, you designate as the primary or the default location that any new files are going to be saved to. It can also be an existing folder that already had a bunch of photos. So when you're first setting up Mylio, you say, hey, my library, my photos are mainly here in this folder. So go ahead and make that the default, and then Mylio is going to scan that folder and bring everything that's already there into the library. The Mylio system folder, which we internally call the root of roots, is the default directory that gets created in your computer user directory no matter what. So no matter where you put your Mylio library folder, the root of root or the Mylio system folder always gets created, and by default it'll get created in your user directory under your name on a folder called Mylio. That folder to Mylio represents the local storage of that device. And this is really important because if let's say that is a laptop, you want that folder to live in your internal drive, because if you want to take your laptop to the coffee shop and not have to bring your array with you in order to do some work, you want an internal folder in which you can put either previews or some of your originals and carry them with you. Now, if you have a stationary device, like a desktop computer, an iMac, a Mac Mini, any Windows desktop machine that either has a lot of local internal storage or is permanently connected to an external array, you can tell Mylio that that external storage or that large depository of storage is part of that device. They're one and the same. And in that instance, I do recommend moving the Mylio system folder to that external drive. Will behave as is all part of the same thing, and then you don't have to worry about it. So depending on your setup, moving the Mylio system folder to an external device is advisable, particularly if it's a connection type that's just as fast as an internal drive would be. So do keep in mind, as Osiris mentioned earlier, that if your Mylio system folder is on an external array, it might be slower to read the thumbnails and for you to scroll through Mylio if all those photos are over there versus an internal SSD drive that's directly connected to the bus of the computer. Does that help, Mark?
Yeah, it was the system drive is what I was going to move. I was actually going to move it to an external SSD to try and make things a little faster, but
and you can, and that will work. One of our oldest and most prolific users, his name is Dan Cox. He's a wildlife photographer. His library is 1.6 million photos, and his system folder on many of his devices is on an external SSD because his library is huge. So it is completely doable, and it works really well. I will throw this little tidbit out there. If you're on a Mac system, maybe email us a support before you move your library system folder, because there is one known issue currently. The issue has already been fixed, but it hasn't been released. It'll be in the next refresh release. So if that's your case, maybe email us before you do the move, and I'll tell you wait or go for it.
Well, I've already
set up.
I'm one of those folks that had that ticket in already. So
so yes, so that bug is fixed, and it should be coming out in a refresh release that we hope will be out in probably a week or two.
Yeah, imminent.
Been waiting for it, but we won't do anything until it shows up.
Excellent. All right.
I mean,
Thank you.
often though, the system folder being local, Mylio is smart enough to still manage it even when you're running out of space. So, at the extreme ends of large libraries, there's always special cases. But for the vast majority of users, keeping your system folder local, even as you're running out of space, can still work really well. Mylio is very smart.
Yes, I agree.
But yeah.
Excellent info.
Yeah, what
Right,
I had, but when I switched away from, was I was using an external drive as my system folder, my system folder, and I was using it as a vault. So I had this idea that that was going to be the best way to use Mylio, and it was not. So that's when I decided to switch to every viewing device having an auto-optimized local system folder. For my case, my size.
So Harold has a clarifying question. He says, so if most of your photos and your library and vaults are on your desktop, what is actually stored on the laptop?
On the laptop, it's as an auto-optimized device. It has smart previews of everything it has room for. And if it runs out of space, it will have thumbnails for the photos I use the least often, or I haven't done ratings, or I haven't edited. So things I'm least likely to need previews for will be thumbnails until I try to access it. And then it will go out to the internet or go onto my local Wi-Fi or look for connected devices to find the smart preview or the original, depending on what I'm trying to do. As long as a vault device is accessible, I can get to a smart preview or original regardless if it lives on that device.
Exactly. All right. Are there any other questions? I know we're getting to the end of our time for today, so I want to make sure everybody's questions are answered. Another question, can you explain the best way to move system folder to a different internal hard drive? Let me grab that link again. I posted in the chat earlier, but I'm not sure if you were online, so let me grab it for you again. We have instructions in our manual. 1 second. There we go. So go ahead and check out this article that I just posted in the chat, and that should walk you through moving to either another internal hard drive or an external hard drive. The process is the same. All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun and very informative. Osiris brought some great information. I learned a few things, so I always appreciate that. Thank you, JC, for jumping in and helping out with a few questions as well. It's always great. And I hope to see all of you again with us next week. We're going to be talking about doing some photo editing. So that's a really fun topic for me. So I hope you can join us. But from there, I'll say have a great day and we'll see you next time.